Bernie is that he's had so many aspects of his life that have where he's reinvented himself. And so I've been intimately involved in some of them, but not all of them. You know, it's impossible to Grant to keep up with a tremendous amount of energy. But I will, and not only energy, but also inventiveness and creativity and vision. I think as far as the history of Zen Buddhism in America, I mean, he's obviously a seminal figure, and his legacy will continue, I think, in many ways. And that's one of the things that Grant has spent the last several years doing. When you have an organization such as Peacemakers that has a charismatic leader, how does the organization continue when the leader is no longer present, you know, to carry the message and the vision? So that's what we're going through right now in Zen Peacemakers. And they planned for it. Grant and the others on the board started planning for this several years ago. Of course, Bernie had a stroke about a little over 2 years ago. And his death, you know, has been a great loss, personal loss, because he was a friend and a mentor for many, many years. But it wasn't the gut punch of Maizumi Roshi dying, because Maizumi Roshi died suddenly, and Bernie had been declining for about 2 years. And both of us went to visit him after his stroke, and I saw him almost every month at hotel conferences, and I just saw that his mental acuity and his attention span was declining over the years. So it was something that we were all preparing for, in a way. But when I met him, he was the right-hand man and head monk at the Zen Center in Los Angeles. And I said this to the group last week, that because of his vision and energy, the Zen Center grew. I mean, Maizumi Roshi was a teacher there, but he wasn't a entrepreneur, you know. He was a teacher, and he liked growth, he liked more people participating, and that would have happened just by the sheer force of his personality and his the depth and strength of his dharma. But Bernie, we called him Tetsugen then. Tetsugen, that was his name, Tetsugen. Was the one who raised the money, bought properties, created all kinds of organizational structure. I mean, the amazing thing about him was he always thought about organization, had all kinds of ideas about organization. And then he would set it up, and then he wouldn't follow it. He would just do what he really thought, you know, needed to be done. He was like water, you know, that just flowed. But in the early days, he was a very strict practitioner. His name Tetsugen means penetrate the subtlety or penetrate the mystery. But there wasn't anything mysterious about him. I mean, he was just bam, you know, like that. And he was practicing in the early years. There's one story, you know, when I was first went there, I was working on my first koan on Mu, and I think both he and Maizumi Roshi were getting frustrated with me because I was so dim. And during the session, I went in to see Maizumi Roshi in Doksan and was presented my koan and bowed down to him. Before he even said anything, he hit me with a stick, rang his bell, threw me out. I went out, and there was Bernie, right outside the door of the Doksan room. He said, "Go back in." He pushed me back in. Same thing, happened about 3 or 4 times. and I don't know who I was, what was going on. And so finally, I think that they gave up on me, and when I came out of the Dokusan room, Bernie said, "Sit down." And he meant for me to go back to my seat and sit down. But I sat down right there in the doorway of the Dokusan. And then he said, "Come on." I was there in the early days, and I actually was at Bernie's Shusa Hosen, which is his head trainee. He was the very first Ango that Maizumi, that we had at the Zen Center in Los Angeles. Bernie was the head trainee. And that was probably about 75, I think, or 76, somewhere around there. And I still have a very clear memory of it. But the thing that I shared, was that during the Dharma combat, I mean, he was just so clear and so precise and so incisive, and that quality he carried through his whole life. But while he was answering the challenges from the Sangha to his Dharma, I looked over at Maizumi Roshi and he was crying. And he was just crying with joy that here he had as a student who understood, and a student that not only understood, but he felt like he had come here to plant the seeds of Zen in this country, and he just saw it right in front of his eyes, and it was just very touching, a very touching moment. When I first started practicing at Zen Center of LA, I lived in San Diego. I was on the faculty of the university there, and I was commuting. I commuted regularly and went back and forth with a number of people in San Diego who are now teachers in the White Plum. I mean, she's deceased now, but the most prominent is Joko Beck, who was a good friend of mine. We used to drive back and forth. And then Chosen Bays was from San Diego. She drove back and forth. I drove her to her first session. And also Miyoyu Palmer Anderson, who's a successor of Maizumi Roshi. She has a center in southern Wisconsin right now. I think those were the successors of Maizumi. Oh no, and Nicolay, Jikyo McMahon, another one. All women. Me and the divine feminine, traveled back and forth. And then Sayson Sanders was also from San Diego and used to drive up back and forth then too. And she was a senior student when Maizumi Roshi died. She became a successor of Bernie's afterward. So there was a lot of very deep Zen activity, but I decided that when I reached a crossroad in my life that I either had to pursue an academic career or a Zen path. And I felt very clearly that my Zen path would be more beneficial as a use of the short life that we have on this planet. But I had a problem. I was divorced and I had 2 kids and I had child support payments. So all these other people like Sayson and Miyoyu had no kids and nothing. They just went and moved to the Zen Center, and Bernie took them in on the staff. You got room and board and $50 a month. Okay? But I couldn't do that because I had to support the kids. So I looked for university teaching jobs around ZCLA so I could live at the center and teach. And when Bernie was talking to me about what is it doing, I said, well, he said, why don't you come here? And I said, I can't. I have these child support payments. And Bernie said, the center will pay them for you. I want you to come and join the staff, and be here. I thought, oh, great. I can go there. I can sit all I want. I can putter around in the garden. I can dig up weeds, And then Bernie said, I want you to be in charge of fundraising. And that was the end of that dream. And that was something that I wasn't prepared for, but we had a guy, a member of the Sangha, his name is Steph Baragato, who was a fundraiser, is a professional fundraiser, and so picked his brains and learned how to run a campaign, and Dido Lori was there, and he and I were in charge of fundraising. And we raised a lot of money for the Zen Center, for the projects. And we put out all this information about what we're going to use the money for, and we raised all the money for it. And then when we got the money, Bernie used the money for something else. And so I love Bernie. I love him with all my heart. But after that, I'm always careful with money around him. I always was careful with money around him. But he's raised tremendous amounts of money in his life. I mean, he made all kinds of contacts, but also, along the way, because he saw what he wanted to do and he went for it, there was a lot of collateral damage. People who gave money and then things that they weren't always what their expectations were. But I will say that he never used the money for his own personal purposes. Never. It was always in the benefit of some project that he was doing. And when he got going, you were either with him or you weren't with him. And if you weren't with him, you got cast off the cart, There were people who were very devoted to him, and when they didn't fulfill what he wanted, somehow, they just got eased out. And you had to really, to keep up with him was almost impossible. But some people have maintained a relationship with him through all the years. But there have been a lot of people who've come and gone, but in the end, they all appreciated what he was doing, but sometimes they felt like they were either not fully appreciated, I guess is the best way to put it, not fully appreciated by him for what they did, because he moved so fast, and he just moved on. And he started that, and I don't know, he raised a lot of money, and he bought for his Zen community in New York a mansion called Grayston. That's where the name comes from, Grayston Mansion. It was right on the banks of the Hudson River, across from Manhattan. And he was surrounded by families, of these aristocratic American wealthy families. I don't know what all, like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, that were his neighbors, and he ascended the mountain there, which means he became the abbot of this community, and that was a big ceremony. I was with my Zumi Roshi from LA, was his attendant. It was huge, and there were all of the famous Buddhist teachers in the country were all there. And again, he had to give a Dharma combat. I just remember one line that was very funny, because he has a tremendous sense of humor. He doesn't take anything seriously. As he became a clown. He was serious when I was practicing with him, but then, he lightened up quite a bit. Somebody asked him, said, "You're now the abbot of the Zen community of New York." He says, "How do you ever get to a position like that?" He says, "I looked in the ads in the New York Times." That was kind of, the way he answered these things. He's just so quick. But after that ceremony, which was written up in the New York Times, actually, it was quite an event. We started a procession from the homes of one of these aristocrats. I don't remember which one it was. And then after it was over, he sold it. Because all the money that people had donated for it, he used it to start the Grayston Foundation. He moved to Yonkers, which is the largest homeless population. The bakery is still ongoing. He bought a bunch of derelict apartment buildings and got craftsmen to train homeless people how to refurbish them and remodel them and make them livable. And once they were finished, they could move in, and they had a skill. And then he had child care, because that was a big problem. And then he bought a nun's home that, or all the nuns had gotten old and were dying off, and there was nobody there. And he used that for a hospice and an HIV treatment center. Now, he got a lot of flack in the Zen community. they said, what does this have to do with Zen? You know, in Zen we sit, we go into these transcendental states, and we see the emptiness of all things, and he felt that this was Zen practice. And people who went with him would complain, we never sit, we never have doksan, you know, and I'd hear all these complaints. And he'd say, this is our practice, this is our practice, this is what we're doing right now. And he developed, through his organizational mind, you know, using the 5 Buddha families, you know, what people's personalities were and where they fit in the community. He did all kinds of things, you know. He was inventive. When Trungpa Rinpoche died, quite a few of Rinpoche's senior students, including Chuck Leaf, who's now the president of Naropa University, became students of Bernie. And they went to Grayston and, you know, helped with the administration, you know, of the organization. I mean, he knew the mayor, he knew the Yonkers, he knew all of the clergy and all of the cathedrals. He knew everything. I mean, he knew everybody. He was on the board of directors for Naropa for a number of years too. And I don't know if he ever slept. You know, I mean, he just did so much. And then after he got Grayston going, he moved to Santa Fe, and his wife, Jishu, died. She had a heart condition. And they moved to Santa Fe, and I was in Colorado, and after a couple of weeks I went down to visit him and spent about a week with him. And he was grieving. I mean, this is a man who I never saw him show any emotion, of any tenderness, you know, toward anybody. And he was, this is the first time I just saw him, he was really grieving. You know, it was a new experience for him. And he told me, he said, Shishin, I just don't think I can do anything more. I think I'm finished. You know, he said, and then he said, take all my stuff. Come on here. And he started giving me all Jishu's notes and everything. Take it. And I said, Bernie, you know, just let it settle down. Well, he wasn't there more than 2 months. In Santa Fe, he said, this isn't my place. You know, I mean, this is spacious and beautiful, and I deserve I need to be in the grime of the city. And so that's when he, they might have overlapped a little bit, because he and Jishu started the Zen Peacemakers order. But that's when he started doing plunges. We call plunges. He said, it's too easy for you guys to sit in session. You know, you're too used to it. Your minds, you know, are just getting in a comfortable space, and he call them plunges. He wanted to get people out of their comfort zone. That's when he started doing homeless retreats on the street retreats. And if you haven't seen it, Michael O'Keefe, the actor, was one of Bernie's first students in that era, and they actually ordained with him as a Zen Peacemaker monk, and did the first street retreats. And just look him up on Facebook. He writes about it, or it's in Lion's Roar, I think, the Lion's Roar magazine. He writes beautifully, and he writes about many of those things with Bernie. And then there's the same time when he started doing the Auschwitz bearing witness retreats, and developed the 3 tenets of the Zen Peacemakers: not knowing, maintaining the mind and not knowing, bearing witness, and loving actions that arise from not knowing and bearing witness. I'll just say a little bit more, and then I'll turn it over to Grant, who was very active with Bernie during the bearing witness retreat days. I was working from home as a director of electronic publishing for a dictionary company called Merriam-Webster, which is headquartered in Springfield, Massachusetts. And I'm trying to think of the year, but it was about 1990 or something like that. this farm, Montague Farm, was given to him by the peace activists who used to run the farm, and they were a big group of peace activists, anti-nuclear war demonstrators. And Bernie had an idea of turning it into a institute, he called the Maizumi Institute, which would focus on social activism and Buddhism, and have conferences and classes and so forth. Well, the Montague Farm was about 40 minutes from Springfield, where the headquarters of the company was I was working for. And I would fly there regularly for meetings. And when I would go, I'd always go see Bernie. And we would study together. He actually wanted me to be on the board of directors, which I did for several years, of the Zen Peacemakers. And it was at that time that I think we had our closest connection over all the years that I've known him. I mean, he always, when I was on the East Coast, he always wanted me to come see what he was doing with the bakeries. He wanted to see the houses, the child care, and the hospice center, you know, but I was in and out. But we spent a lot of time together, and he came to Colorado a number of times too. So, the last kind of official thing he did for us was he came to the Abbey and he installed Shinko as the abbess. And then he performed our wedding ceremony. Yes. And with his nose. Yeah, I didn't mention it. He studied to be a clown, too, Mr. Yu. And during, we got married underneath the big apple tree in the backyard. And Shinko entitled our wedding Return to Eden. And during the ceremony, we wanted Bernie to pick a nice red apple off the tree and give it to us, and we would eat it. And he said, before these, I forgot to tell you, I'm colorblind. But he did manage to get a nice apple. And the home in Montague, where I spent many, many hours with him, is where he actually died, which has been almost 2 weeks. So I think I'll turn it over to Grant to fill in his life up to there, and then maybe if you have any questions after he talks, we can, about Bernie, we can answer them.
Thank you, Shishin. So there are 3 things that come to mind. I want to just support that you said. One was interesting. I had never really thought about it in a conscious way that Bernie was an incredible combination of powerful, grounded, spiritual teacher, but also an entrepreneur, someone who, Silicon Valley doesn't have anyone that could beat him. And it was amazing that he could do both of those things. I never really thought about it that way, but that was the reality. That was his great gift. The second thing I would just say is that the Dharma Combat talks that Shishin was talking about are available in written form in some of the books like Hazy Moon, and if you have access to any of the old ZCLA pamphlets, you can read some of those, and they're brilliant. They really are. I mean, a good, what do you call it, translate, when you put it's written, there's nothing to listen to. Thank you, they're great transcriptions. And I got involved with Bernie. This is the third thing I'll mention in a second, because this will lead to it, but the snow next to the tracks at Auschwitz. And I think this was in '96. And I remember thinking, why in the world would anybody want to do that? But simultaneous to that thought, I had, why do I want to do that? I mean, I was just immediately called. Well, not so immediate, but I was called, and that seed sat there until 2010. Went through Fleet Mall, I found out that there was going to be another Bearing Witness retreat at Auschwitz. And it came at a time when I didn't have the excuses of a full-time job and everything else. And I saw it, and I thought to myself immediately, I don't know what's in my calendar, but I don't care because it's moving, because I'm going. And the experience of being at Auschwitz with Bernie, and that plunge, that true Bearing Witness, that being with the place one of the places of incredibly great misery, suffering, purposeful. Humanity's darker moments. I felt this great sense of existential oneness and love, and it's amazing. And I said to Bernie, how can I help you? What can I do? So that was 2010, and he said, well, why don't you join the board? And I said, well, hold on, man, I don't think I can. I've been on boards, they're dysfunctional. Well, anyway, I ended up joining the board. But I had come across Bernie, this was after he'd invested a lot into the house, the barn that Shishin was talking about. And it had come in as a house of one people. And it was really meant to be a true interfaith, inter-people dialogue spot for oneness. It was a way to just sort of bring people together. It was deeply in debt. And it, by my opinion, it didn't have a path. And Bernie, the incredible entrepreneur, I think, had finally bitten off more than he could chew. And the collateral damage that I think Shishin called them, the folks in the past who had given money, been promised in a upaic sort of way from Bernie for payment. That was the expedient means to get the money, to get the job done that he wanted, that he thought was necessary to address the hungry ghost, to stay with that analogy. Some people were angry, and it felt to me like these were bodies by the wayside. There was anger. To my third point, from what Shishin said, is what it just now occurs to me is there's different ways of teaching, and this was Bernie's. I don't know necessarily it was conscious, but I'm not sure spiritual teaching is always conscious, or maybe rarely. To crush the self. Because the folks that fell by the wayside, the ones that didn't feel properly appreciated, I mean, isn't that a sense of self? Isn't that the suffering that we have? Is I haven't been appreciated, and this was Bernie, and it never really occurred to me. Like, he was like, what? Thanks for that $150,000 for that thing we were going to do. Well, in fact, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this because things change, and this is what I'm called to do. It needs to be done now. We have the money. Thank you very much. But this is what we're going to do. Well, but what about? Well, self. You know, it was amazing. I mean, again, I hadn't really thought about it that way until just now. And I came across Bernie as I think he had not. He didn't keep the energy. He was getting older, and he didn't have the energy to really drive things forward. And I think he'd just run out of money wells, taps, places where he could get the sources. Otherwise, he would have kept going. But he had also, and it may have been Jishu's death, but he was incredibly softer than the guy that was very easily and very routinely described to me. And really, what sounds like, is I didn't know him at that time, but he sounds like the perfect 20th century embodiment of Bodhidharma. And he was, that was Bernie. I mean, you see the pictures of him. He was Bodhidharma in the 20th century. But he was a guy getting older, and he was struggling. He felt personally liable for the debts. He wanted to pay the debts back, but he didn't have the capacity anymore, and he sort of lost. And I got involved, and I was happy to be able to serve him in a way that brought the skills that I'd had being in Wall Street and such to bear. It was a great blessing and gift for me to be able to serve that. And we knew too, he was getting older, and he spoke about the need to get the legacy. And the core of his legacy are the three tenets. And there are three tenets in the form of my first real plunge into the three tenets was at Auschwitz. And the practice of counsel is such an integral part of that, which we'll be doing in a little bit. But it was such a way to explode one's heart if one's really there, that I was like, called, yes, this is such a beautiful, I want to help plant that seed and help support its expansion. So we went through a number of iterations on Zen Peacemakers and Zen Peacemaker Order, which makes some people uncomfortable because it sounds like a religious order, and religious orders have caused problems in the past in Europe. So that was a sensitivity. But we ended up coming up with Zen Peacemaker International. And Bernie was on the board, and we were trying to trying to transition, and we finally came to the conclusion maybe, well, it was after a stroke. Yeah. We were transitioning to Bernie off the board, and then he had a stroke, and that made that transition a lot more immediate and obvious. And so for the last, because it was 3 years ago this January, was his stroke, and we started organizing. We had a number of the great lineage holder teachers who got involved in trying to create a ZPO, sort of practices for transmission. Lots of rolling around, lots of opinions. Bernie likes to talk about opinions, but a lot of opinions about how this should go forward. And it really started to gel about a year ago with an international board. And we've been in dress rehearsal for this moment when Bernie's gone. And we have, I think we're meeting tomorrow, if not tomorrow, Tuesday. It'll be the first time the board's met since Bernie passed. And the issues that we need to address are fundraising for his widow, Eve, fundraising for the legacy of ZPI and 3 tenants. How does that work? And what kind of memorial might we do that's a larger one than the small one that happened in Massachusetts? There are memorials that are happening at different Zen centers that have been affiliated with Bernie around. So we're just like, we've got to talk about these details, but now's when we really need to get down to making sure that we've established and support, nurture the foundation for the tenants. And we're looking forward to that. And the earlier conversation we had about the hive is so important. It's been disappointing that we haven't gotten more people in the hive. We had, when we just started at the beginning of this year, end of last year, we had forecasted that we'd hope to have 3,000 members by this time, well, by the end of the year. And we're now 1,100, something like that. So it's nice, it's good, but it's not the kind of exponential growth we were hoping would happen. One of the decisions that we made early, which I support, Infinite Circle, which if you haven't read Infinite Circle, wow, what a book. Not big, but deep and clear, relative and absolute. I mean, it's beautiful. And I was just full of appreciation. I was looking forward to calling him because he, in his older age, he didn't have a lot of things to do and he'd like getting calls. So I was getting ready to call him and just give him my deepest appreciation for all he's done. So I guess I'll be talking to him a different way now, but he'll always be with us. And it's a great joy to have been part of serving him a little bit in his later years. So, thank you. Questions?
Yeah.